Hello everyone, welcome to the 7th and final session for Designing for PoE Lighting and Automation, where top design professionals and subject matter experts with experience in designing and constructing Power over Ethernet intelligent buildings share their best practices and lessons learned. Today's session, and I'm going to throw up a quick title here, will provide you with best practices for operating and maintaining a PoE automated building. Through this session and the previous sessions, you will have gained crucial skills and knowledge essential to delivering better intelligent buildings for developers and owners. Now, if you've missed any of the 7 sessions, and I'll throw them up here, if you've missed any of the 7 previous sessions, you can find them all in the links I'm going to throw into the chat right next door. And you can find all the videos and the presentations. Also, if you're not familiar with it, over the past week, we have been at Bixie. So let me throw up this title here. We've been at Bixie Live with these and other presenters doing presentations about PoE lighting, PoE automation, the best you can find in PoE today. So go back and check those out. You'll find them on our YouTube channel, and I'll throw them in the link. Why don't we go ahead? I'd like to turn it over to our speaker today, and I'm very excited to see what Joe has for us. Joseph Herbst has worked in several rapidly evolving markets over his career. His accomplishments include the creation of the world's first power management laptop chipsets, design of semiconductors that were the engine in Cisco switches, the growth of digital video technology from CRTs to flat screen TVs, and recently, the development of a PoE lighting control platform. Joe has founded 4 startups with 3 successful exits. Joe holds 16 patents, has a BSEE from the University of Delaware, MSEE from Purdue University, and an MBA from Santa Clara University. Joe, welcome to the show. We're looking forward to seeing what you will be presenting to us today.
Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate the opportunity. We've had a couple of sessions now talking through all of the design and roles and responsibilities involved in Power over Ethernet building automation systems. One of the audience target individuals and teams that I want to kind of also include and focus on today is specifically the facility and operations part of all of this. So very often you're selling to the CEO, the CIO, or the CTO. Often I look at the facility managers and operating COOs as holding often a veto vote. So it's as important to include them in this decision process. I want to just kind of go over some of the things that they're going to have to manage and take care of as PoE starts to encroach into digital building automation, and look at some skill sets that they're going to have to acquire as part of that. First, let me leave with a couple of examples. So these are things that are largely being talked about with architects and engineering firms that, let's take, for example, living walls. So this is a system that has a number of elements that need to be maintained. Everything from water consumption, light levels, air sensors, temperature, ventilation. These are all systems that need to interact and interoperate. Another good example is water collection and reuse. So in the vein of sustainability, being able to essentially reclaim a lot of the water that is otherwise wasted involves a number of different systems, geothermal heating and cooling. This is a great opportunity to essentially stabilize the temperature within a building from external variation and change. So being able to dynamically flow water through the ground and use that as a buffer for the temperature within the building. Another huge one that's very popular and at least talking a lot of businesses are looking at is energy storage systems. So here's an example of Con Edison. They have a 30-to-1 ratio of peak rate versus off rates. So there are facilities and buildings that are looking to develop these energy storage systems so that they can charge during the night, discharge during the day, and essentially stabilize what's known in the utility industry as this duck curve. So essentially looking at peak rate versus off-peak rate consumptions. So in the world of IT and OT, I mean, these are very different worlds. I often look for a picture that can say 1,000 words, and if you take a look at these two pictures, I think they say everything. So on the left, you've got essentially an IT room, predominantly headless, server racks everywhere. On the right, you have an OT room where monitors are literally covering every inch of wall space. And up at the top, you can see different elements and focus points for each in the IT domain and the OT domain. And I often like it, these two worlds colliding are kind of like two galaxies colliding. So we hope to give you some insight to support that. The way these two are combining and colliding and coming together, I put into two models. The first is this convergence model. So IT and OT through a power over Ethernet infrastructure essentially follow an OSI model. OSI is a model by which the internet standards are based, but essentially you have different layers and levels. And essentially you can have these two worlds come together through standard established protocols and essentially merge. I also talk about an absorption model. So OT, based on its need for reliability, consistency, and predictability over time, I see a model where it actually is just absorbing some of the better practices, capabilities of the IT world, and essentially pulling them in as they learn about them and as they deem appropriate, stable. So for example, doing app updates is something that an IT world is very familiar with, but an OT person would be very reluctant to do. You don't just update the app on your HVAC system, for example. PoE is kind of at the center of this. So what Power over Ethernet has the ability to do is essentially unify the disparate worlds of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So if you look at essentially a building, the flow rate of money through that building is essentially the flow rate of air, flow rate of electricity, and the flow rate of water, essentially summed together and whatever rate being charged for each. But Power over Ethernet has the unique ability to unify these systems in a way that no other technology can. So I know there are wireless technologies. Wireless has limitations, for example, going through floors. Power over Ethernet has a very unique capability, not just its bandwidth, but its reach in terms of interoperability. In a controls world, one of the things I often encourage is if you look at controls, it really breaks down into, on the left-hand side, you have stimulus. On the right-hand side, you have response. So stimulus may be a wall switch press or an occupancy event or a light level reading or a pressure sensor on a valve or air pressure sensor. On the right-hand side, you have the response. A light turns on, HVAC turns on or off, an email is sent out, or an alarm is sounded. The beautiful thing about Power over Ethernet is everything between those two now can be completely software defined. So the ability to connect a temperature sensor through an outside weather forecasting app and affect and adjust the HVAC in accordance to that. So this technology, more than any other technology, has the ability to unify all of these, again, through open standards. So some of the benefits of PoE as relevant to a facility manager is global replacement options. Because it's interoperable with it's a standards-based technology, the ability to replace devices now becomes a global capability. So we're no longer fighting over 120 versus 277 versus 347 versus 240. You have the ability to literally source it from anywhere in the world. The observability, we are getting into this world of IoT where there are so many devices out there, and the ability to connect them all through a Power over Ethernet infrastructure gives you observability and insight to your building. Again, controllability, how do we more effectively use our space so that we're not just having empty conference rooms 60% of the time. Some of the challenges, obviously now facility managers now have an increased scope of responsibility. They're going to require more training, and it's going to change over time, so they got to stay up on top of this. And then ultimately this has to last 20 years. But the insight you get to your facility now will be unprecedented. The ability to look at not just energy consumption, but against all the flow rate of electricity, water, air, and the ability to incorporate sensor feedback gives you an ability to also create a look at causality. So how much is this occupancy sensor saving me with regard to energy? How much is this temperature sensor helping my comfort within these conference rooms or this open office area? So that causality and being able to tightly connect sensors with the corresponding effects that you take. So let's take a look at the facility operations engagement model. So I break it apart at the occupation point. So pre-occupation, post-occupation. So when you get your certificate of occupancy is kind of a handoff point. On the pre side, you have design, construction, and commissioning. On the post side, I've roughly broken it down into security, maintenance, and services. One of the things that I'm going to really advocate strongly is that when you adopt a PoE building, that you essentially have a new hire, an automation and data exchange engineer, essentially someone who can look at both of these worlds and be able to collect data, has IT experience, but understands the needs and concerns of an OT world. I also recommend a new committee. So that committee should at a minimum include the CIO, the COO, and then specifically an outside cybersecurity specialist. And I want outside so that no one's, mired or blinded by their own preconceptions. So a little bit about each. So pre-occupancy. Within the design, I strongly encourage facility manager to participate in the naming schema. I'll get into a little bit more in a bit, but there's nothing more important in terms of communication than having a name for all of the devices that you're going to put in the system. There are a lot of IT models in terms of how you build and create the system. So have different VLANs, subnets, have an awareness of how to isolate these networks. So that helps with your security, but also helps with just the scalability. So you're not sitting there trying to eat the elephant all at once, the proverbial elephant, and the fidelity of what you can observe and control. On the construction side, I really recommend that you have the as-built autonomously generated. So PoE is an intelligent technology. The as-builts historically have always deviated from the intended design. One of the beautiful things about Power over Ethernet is the ability to automatically generate the as-builts. And then I strongly, strongly encourage on the commissioning process, participate in that startup process. Be the point of focus for both the internal people that you're going to support, but also the outside people that have the equipment. On the post-occupancy side, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but you're now going to have all of these new technologies, and being able to incorporate those in a seamless way essentially means that you're going to have to stay educated, track, and look at the equipment as it goes forward in time. Make sure that you've got a failover plan so that if you need to have hot swap capability or redundant architectures, make sure you understand that and be able to support that. And then obviously services, being able to respond to people who want to do like conference room reservations or insight to where a building is being used or not used. So let me delve in a little bit. An example, one of the things I talked about was the naming convention. So everything in a PoE infrastructure now has a name because they all can be individually controlled. So you have nodes. One of the practices I strongly encourage is a naming schema that involves three things: the reflected ceiling plan, the physical wiring, and then the last four digits of the MAC address of the device that's controlling it. So essentially what we've done here is we've unified the design intention, the physical installation, and then ultimately the software connection to those two. So in this example, I've got a node 110, so that's a light fixture, and it's physically wired to output 1, on the MAC address or of the node ending in MAC address 01D7. So essentially I've linked these three worlds, and now I can have, when I'm done, an automatically generated as-built. So the MAC addresses of the devices, what's physically connected on those outputs, what is physically connected on those inputs, and then now I can build groups and scenes that support that. So, in conclusion, strongly recommend PoE buildings, especially large ones, have either an ADX engineer or someone who is familiar with IT worlds and practices. Absolutely critical that you have to have a system that is independent of the internet. So if the internet goes down, the only thing you lose are remote access and data collection. Functional operation has to be independent of the internet. Make sure that you are becoming aware of network topology, network architectures, understanding basic, for example, Linux scripts and or ability to manage and control and query networks for the current status. Setting up VLANs. Anticipate you're going to get new services. So, you know, people are going to want to be able to have higher fidelity. One just off the cuff example is in the world of COVID, using HVAC systems to create positive air pressure so that you have a greater degree of recirculation flow, so that the air is less stale and more fresh. That's an example of something that facility managers are going to need to look at in a new world, come back to work order. Make sure you understand replacement parts, strategies. You know, most of these systems are going to last 5–10 years, but you want to have the ability to plug in a replacement and not have a major downtime issue. Outside agencies can come in and help, but I do recommend getting in deep enough that you have the ability to understand the technology. And then finally, I strongly encourage avoid recurring costs for software. I have no issue with recurring costs for service, but software in a capital project-based model just can get sticky and has some other downstream effects. So strongly encourage avoid recurring costs for software. And that's it.
All right, guys. Well, great. Everybody, what questions do you have for Joe? All right. You know what, Joe? You've done a great job. It looks like we've gotten most of the questions answered right in the conversation. So,
Okay.
I do. Oh, let me get that set up right. Joe, a question I wanted to ask you about the system for maintaining and operating a system are spares. People always ask about spares. How many and what kind of spares should you keep? What would you tell somebody about spares?
Spares are sometimes called attic stock is another one. I typically recommend about a 5% spare ratio. Depends on the criticality of your operation, but for example, in our systems, typically we'll have a gateway per suite or a gateway per floor. So you may want to have a spare gateway per floor, or you may want to have a 1:10 ratio on spare gateways. So the spare gateway essentially can be a hot swap. If one goes down, you can just load its profile into the spare and you're back up and running. If you have a node that goes down, you have the ability to essentially replace it quickly. So roughly a 5% ratio.
Okay, 5%. Is that of all the hardware, including switches, routers? Obviously, we talked about the links or the nodes that drive the LEDs and the controllers. Is that across the board, or do you target it?
No, it can be, so it depends. So maybe one switch per rack if you know you can't get it quickly. So if you know you can get, for example, a replacement switch within a couple of days, then you may only want to have one per building, for example. If you want to have a gateway, but you know its lead time is typically 4 to 6 weeks, then I would have at least one gateway per floor or one per every couple of floors. And then links, I would probably, the nodes, I would have 15 just in stock on hand. And that's not just necessarily replacements, that may be a quick expansion or something you want to do and not have to wait, 2 to 4 weeks for a part to arrive. So really tied to lead time.
Okay, it's tied to lead time. What about the question of configuration storage and recovery? What tips or advice would you give for maintaining a recovery system of your configuration?
So I strongly encourage, especially in this rubric of power of Ethernet, that the devices all have the ability to be backed up and restored in a very prompt and quick manner. So OT is all about reliability and resilience, and having the ability to quickly do a hot swap on a power supply or be able to do a hot swap on a gateway. So having each of the nodes, the gateways, be able to offload a profile, similar to like a Windows registry, but essentially offload a profile so that an alternate spare gateway can just be loaded with that profile and the system back up and running in a very quick way, is an example of an OT-friendly approach that a standard traditional IT paradigm would not hold. So you don't have a spare app on your phone, you just have to update the app, and sometimes updates go wrong. In this paradigm, you essentially have a spare piece of hardware and a quick way to take on whatever behavior is required to replace one that's down.
Okay, very cool, very cool. And then, and I'm just double checking here to see if we have any more questions coming in through the Q&A app. All right, so I'll give one last question. Everybody, get your questions in for Joe. We'll see if we can field one more question. So, Joe, when it comes to the operational effects in your facility, what the lights do and how they do it, what are the best practices for a professional to start to help document and communicate this is what our facility should do? Does that come from the lighting designer? Does it come from operations? Who does that?
There's a couple of parties that contribute to that. So first is the owner operator. They're going to want a certain level of behavior, and their target may be energy savings. Their target may be ambiance. So understanding what we call the controls intention is the first most important thing. Second is energy code. So if you have to be energy code compliant, maybe that's ASHRAE, maybe that's California Title 24, understanding the requirements of that energy code and dovetailing in the controls intention with that to make sure that your AHJ is going to sign off on the energy model of the controls. And then ultimately, you want a system that can adapt. So for example, nowadays buildings aren't, you're seeing fewer and fewer 10-year leases and 20-year leases. So having the infrastructure by which a building can put up walls or take down walls and not have to hire an electrician to rewire, for example, lighting is really, really valuable. So with a PoE-based system, because it's all software controlled and everything is individually addressable, literally it's just a software reroute in terms of who responds to what light switch or what occupancy sensor or daylight sensor, for example. And you don't have to then burden the cost with a high voltage electrician. So that flexibility is really important when you're looking forward for the life of a building 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Very cool. Excellent, excellent. Well, Joe, thank you so much for your presentation today. I feel like it has been hugely valuable. Thank you, Joe.
My pleasure.
Everyone, go ahead and give a shout out to Joe in the chat line. Tell him what you thought. Give him a sign of appreciation. We really appreciate the time and effort he put into this. I think we can all agree that the value of PoE will be in the recurring and the operational costs. So this has been a hugely valuable session. With that, everyone, you have officially completed are all 7 sessions of our course on designing for PoE lighting and automation. We hope that you felt like it is as valuable as we do preparing it for you, and we appreciate you being our audience and participating in these sessions. Now, if you would like to speak to Joe directly, I'm going to throw up here Joe's email address so that you can reach out to him, or you can just ask to be contacted in the post-session questionnaire that will come for attending today. So join us, you can email him or contact him. So with that, everyone, I want to congratulate you for doing 7 full sessions of designing for PoE lighting and automation, learning about the ins and the outs from the concept to completion and operations. Congratulations, you've done it. Feel proud, take this, and if you need, just email me and I'll send you a certificate. Thank you all for joining us today. We will let you know as new sessions and new opportunities arise to help continue your education in PoE lighting and automation. So thank you very much. Y'all have a great weekend.